Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation. My name is Reverend Dr. Q English, and I am the Director for the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. So we all know that too many people are experiencing suicidal crisis or mental health related distress without the support and care they need. And sadly, the pandemic only made a bad situation worse when it comes to mental health and wellness in America. And for people aged 10 to 34 years old, suicide is a leading cause of death. But there is hope and resources for people in crisis to connect with trained professionals ready to provide support to people in crisis. The 988 dialing code operates through what was formerly known as the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It is a network of over 200 locally operated and funded crisis centers across the country. But far too often, stigma and fear from our culture and communities keep people reaching out for help, even when it is just 3 phone digits away. So having healthy conversations like the conversation we will model on our webinar today is the best way to reduce that stigma as we replace fear with hope for individuals in crisis in all communities. So today we are so glad to welcome a wide range of leaders and organizations to this healthy conversation today. In the essence of time, I'm going to introduce everyone quickly with just their name and title. A longer bio is provided for our panelists on the registration page that we are dropping into the chat now. So we have with us Samir Ahmed, Executive Director of the Family and Youth Institute, who work extensively with the Muslim community on suicide prevention. Erin Barr, Clinical Coordinator for Upstreet, a mental health program for youth coordinated through the Jewish Family and Community Services. Deborah Frazier Howes, Founder and President for Choose Healthy Life. Josephine M. Kim, a Senior Lecturer on Education at Harvard University and founder of Mustard Seed Generation that works to address mental health through Korean American faith communities. Dr. Saja Mehta, a physician in private practice who works with and volunteers supporting BAPS communities in the Hindu tradition. Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, Executive Vice President at the New York Board of Rabbis. Imam Dr. Talib M. Sharif, President and Imam at Masjid Muhammad, the nation's mosque, and Deep Singh, who is part of the Sikh community and serves as the Executive Director of the Jakhara movement. I also want to thank and welcome our ASL interpreters and captioners who are assisting us with the event today. So let's start with our first question with our esteemed panelists. When we think about what is preventing our congregations or community from receiving mental health services, we often hear the word stigma. Tell me, what are the challenges in your culture and faith community that makes it hard to talk about when we are struggling? Let's start with Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
Thank you, Reverend Q. When I first became a rabbi, I remember we did a lot of whispering. When it came to alcoholism, we whispered about it. When it came to sex trafficking, we whispered about it. And when it came to mental health, we whispered about that. Finally, in some cases, we stopped whispering and started speaking and speaking loudly. That's why this kind of symposium to me is mandatory. We need to do a lot more talking. I've been chaplain also at FDNY for many years. I hear 2 phrases that are very haunting. One is, if only, and the second is, too late. How many times I've heard, if only we had a detection system, if only we had done a little bit more to prevent this tragedy, but now it's too late. We don't want to hear those words when it comes to mental health. So thankfully, we are having this kind of exchange to ask what more can we do. The challenge for us in Jewish tradition is that for many years, and still ongoing in some places, the stigma is rooted in a view of tradition. The Bible says, and this is in Genesis 9:5, chapter 9, verse 5, God says, I will demand the blood of your souls, which means I will demand an accounting. that your life is lent to you. It's not given to you, it's lent to you, and you have to return it as I have given it to you. Because of that, suicide is a prohibition in Jewish law. Historically, there were many times, and again, even now, where people who committed suicide were seen as outside the camp, as pariahs, as deserving of burial outside the traditional grounds, outside the cemetery. But thankfully, many have come forward and said, wait a minute, we can't use a standard that doesn't have some understanding of the suicide crisis. Mental health has to be a component that has to be examined. So that many rabbis now, many people who are traditionalists, but see tradition as something that evolves, says, well, when someone commits suicide, the person is not of full sound mind. There is something else going on. So you can't say, well, you committed suicide, you're outside the camp. So thankfully, we're looking more at the mental side and not just the final act, and always asking what more could we have done. And finally, I would say this, it's interesting that when you look at Jewish tradition, King Saul committed suicide. King Saul is venerated in the Jewish world. When you go to Masada in Israel, you'll see there the place of suicide, where people committed suicide because they didn't want to be massacred by the Romans. Those people are treated as heroes. So obviously, there is a strong school of thought that says, look at the condition of the mind. Do as much as you can at the earlier stage, so we don't say if only and too late. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Rabbi Potasman. If only too late. We're going to go next to Dr. Josephine Kim.
Yes, thank you so much for this valuable question. You know, anytime we speak of minority groups in the US, we do need to give voice to both the external factors as well as the within community factors, understanding that our mental health really sits at the nexus of both of those things, and they both work to keep people boxed in. I would say one of the external forces that prevent help seeking for Korean Americans specifically, and many Asian Americans, is the model minority myth, a stereotype that really paints a very narrow narrative about Asians being perfect, that we don't have any struggles or problems. It really prevents outsiders from reaching in to offer help. It certainly prevents insiders from reaching out to seek help. This also bleeds into the church. There's a strong culture of perfectionism, and combine that to legalism, you can imagine then the consequences. I would say with the within community factors, mental health literacy is generally low. There are cultural beliefs around associated with shame and losing faith, how mental health challenges might bring dishonor to the family, that seeking help may be a sign of weakness. Some even attribute it to sin or bad blood. There's also a strong belief that they can somehow will away their mental health challenges. And if their faith was just a little bit stronger, they wouldn't feel so depressed or so anxious, for example. And I would say lastly, there's an unfamiliarity with systems of support that exist in the Western world. And there's also a deep-rooted skepticism about the efficacy of those systems.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. We'll go next to Imam Talib Sharif to describe the challenges in the Muslim community.
Thank you, Reverend Q. I used to be, I was in the military for 30 years. And of course, we know suicide is no different there in terms of the numbers, and they're off the charts as well. But similar to the military, whereas if a person sought help for mental conditions, the PTSD, they were considered to be weak, not strong. They weren't fit for duty, so they would often hide. So similar, and we heard some of this from my colleagues here, for Muslims as well, it's considered to be something of just a faith thing. If your faith is strong, then you should be able to overcome anything. You don't need any help, just have your faith in God. But God wants us to know, and we're beginning to educate more Muslims on this now. Our creed is belief in God, but also belief in human being, the prophets. So have faith in God and have faith also in man. So we're beginning to push that more. There are a lot of stigmas associated with it. they feel they'll be seen unfavorably. They believe their worth will be diminished. These kind of things are also associated with them. And again, the majority of our population eventually was beginning was African Americans, and a lot of them had a lot of different stigmas about it as well. And another thing with Muslims is they had a challenge going outside of the Muslim faith for anyone else that wasn't a Muslim, giving them help. And there are not a lot of professionals in this field within the faith. In fact, many of the imams, they haven't even been touching the subject to let the people know that there is some help that they can receive. That's why, again, I just was mentioning about this. This is very important to bring these kind of communities together to show that we have this in common. We share this as human beings, regardless of our religious identity, our human identity. We all suffer with this as well. So these are some of the things that we're still dealing with as well. Thank you.
No, thank you, Imam Sharif. And I think we're hearing the common thread of, through religions, no matter what religious background we're coming from, we do share similarities as far as the stigma within our own religious faith traditions. I'm going to go now to Dr. Mehta.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me part of this esteemed panel. You are absolutely right, Reverend Q. This is across the board. It does not, mental illness does not discriminate. It's a global issue, and being human is the biggest risk factor, because just like any other part of the body, the brain is part of our body. And just like anything else can go wrong, brain can also have a malfunctioning few cells, which can give rise to mental illness. And unfortunately, many times the outcome is suicide, which is not a very good outcome by any means. Being a psychiatrist, I have been able to help people from every religion, every corner of life, every socio-economic way. I do want to share some of the challenges that Hindus have been facing in our country right now. One of the things is that ingrained, just like everyone else said, that ingrained notion of weakness, that if you are seeking help, if you are having depression or anxiety, somehow you are weak and you shouldn't be getting any help. And that's where most people are harboring that. Many of the Hindus here in mainland United States is migrants. So there is a first generation and second generation differences in mental health and wellness and illness as well. The first generation are like, okay, we are gonna make it happen. We are gonna work hard and get to that American dream, and we are gonna work towards that. And they have been really struggling with access to the care. Language is a barrier for some of them, and they don't know how to get everything organized. Second generation, the kids that have been born here and raised here, are living between two different worlds. There is one world, one set of value at home, and when they step out and spend 8 hours at school and college, there is another set of value that they get exposed to. So there is a lot of problems and a lot of peer pressure. Social media is not helping when they are posing suicide challenges and high-risk activities on. So kids are actually going through a lot. And as Reverend Q mentioned, suicide has now become the leading cause, which is very unfortunate in younger generation. There is a lot of emphasis on education in Hindu families, and not everybody is going to be number one. Can't be. And that's where the problem is, that there's a lot of pressure. Social fabric has been thinning. The families are becoming more like a unique family, mother, father, and kids. And while in Hindu faith, and the extended family is also part of the family. But we don't have those resources available here at times. And that is one of the issues that is contributing. And there are definitely a lot of opportunities, and we will talk about that later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mehta. I think your opening statement really captures what we're saying here today. Mental illness does not discriminate. We'll continue that conversation. Next, Erin Barr, will you share?
Yes, happy to be here. Thank you. I'm going to talk just mostly about like the youth perspective, because that's what I do. I work with people 12 to 22 years old. And when we think about that age demographic, they're in a phase of development where they're trying to figure out who they are, what their purpose in the world is, like, what are they supposed to be doing? How do they fit into all of it? And I think that sometimes when some of those questions or explorations that they're having aren't in line or aren't in sync with what their faith tradition teaches or expects them to become, it can be hard for them to reach out and talk to people. It's hard to figure out who are the safe people with whom they can speak about some of these things. You know, I think they worry that their parents or adults in their lives will be critical of some of those questions or minimize the experiences and blow it off. Like we hear so often, like young people say, my parents told me it was just hormones or it's just a phase, right? And so they're minimized and they don't think that those feelings or those questions or concerns that they have about themselves are valid. I think it comes up a lot when we're talking about things that are also traditionally linked with suicidality or suicidal tendencies, things like traditional gender roles, sexuality, gender identity, being the victim of abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, or otherwise, especially if that the abuser was somewhere within the family or within the community of faith. So they take these things underground, right? Like they don't want to talk about it. There's fear about reaching out and talking to people about how they're feeling or what they've experienced, which is why I think conversations like this one we're having right now are crucial to the well-being of our young people. We as adults and we as leaders in our faith traditions and our communities need to come together and be comfortable talking about these things so that we can then send the message and sort of set that example or model for our young people how safe it is and how safe adults can be to talk about it so they don't have to stay hidden, like the rabbi said. So we're not saying like if only or now it's too late, right? So being proactive about it.
Thank you, Erin. And right before we go to our next set of questions, I'm just hearing so much the need to reevaluate our expectations within our own individual faith traditions. And we don't want to continue the conversation around if only and too late. We heard the importance of looking at the condition of the mind and do as much as we can at the earliest possible moment. We also need to have a great need for mental health literacy, as well as access to care. And we also are hearing the fact that because they embrace the tradition in all of our faith, many of our faith traditions, that, you know, God is the answer to it all. Therefore, seeking external help is not necessary. So we do need to look at that and reevaluate how we approach it. And perhaps if we do that, we can minimize the suicides that are taking place in our nation. In addition, last year in 2021, the U.S. emergency departments had an uptick of over 51% of adolescents attempting suicide. And that's ages 12 to 17. So it was declared a national emergency last year, to your point, Erin, mental health in youth. And so there's much more that we need to do in this space. Let's go on to our second question, as we keep in mind the final comment that Dr. Mehta made, which was mental illness does not discriminate. So our next question, what are the opportunities in your culture and faith tradition to connect people in crisis to professional services and support? For example, individuals that are available through the 988 Lifeline Crisis Center. We actually created a PSA at the Partnership Center with clergy with lived experiences addressing stigma, as well as promoting our 988 Lifeline. And we want to share that in our chat today. We are not able, in the essence of time, to actually show it, but it was in partnership with Choose Healthy Life Clergy. And we would love for you to be able to show that and share it rather with your respective community via social media or within your houses of worship as deemed appropriate. So we want to start that question off with Deep Singh.
Thank you, and it's amazing just to hear so many different great responses to the first section, and so many were resonating with me. In terms of Reverend Dr. English's question about, at least within the Sikh tradition, how people are kind of connecting specifically with professional services, you're seeing this on a multitude of fronts. If, within the Sikh tradition, there's a very kind of famous story where an individual is kind of reflecting that his house is burning. He's looking left and right, but until he goes his higher ground, he sees that this world village is burning. And if this world village is burning, then it's going to take a whole village to come up with solutions. And we're going to have to do this together. In terms of professional services, with the Sikh community, at least in the United States, largely being an immigrant community, you're still seeing kind of challenges, many that were shared, and some very much in terms of those that maybe have been here for many longer generations in terms of stigma. The thing that really gives me hope, at least with professional services, is I think certain parts of the mental health kind of practice are self-reflecting, how to, in terms of harms some of them have done in the past and why people may have certain apprehensions to sort of bridge that gap. But really it's the second generation and third generation youth that are really looking to actually go into this as a field where they're looking at intergenerational trauma, and many of them are sort of inspired and are motivated by maybe some of the traumas that they have faced or that their family has faced. So I think they're going to be a key bridge in terms of really kind of connecting specifically professional help services, while not having sharp binaries of Western or Eastern or whatever the binaries that may be being invoked, but really looking for ways that we can take the best of different practices and really make sure that individuals and hopefully the village and the world is getting the help that they need.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dee. Appreciate that. Next, we'll turn to Deborah Fraser-Howes. What are the opportunities in your culture and faith tradition to connect people in crisis to professional services and support?
Thank you, Reverend English, and thank you for having me here. The Black church, the Black community is very skeptical of healthcare, many different services, but there is trust and hope and healing in the Black church. We have a number of systems in the Black church community. The pastors often know when families are in crisis because people come to them for counseling. We have all other types of systems where we put people on prayer lists and we go to visit, and there's a number of touch points and opportunities within the church. Like you mentioned, you just did a video with the Choose Healthy Life ministers and their own experiences, their own personal experiences with suicide. And people don't realize that all of this is going on in the community. So another opportunity is to get the ministers to talk to the community in general and say, this is what's going on. This is what's happened to me. I understand it. I have firsthand experience with it. And there are a number of different programs that are coming about in the Black church, one of which is Choose Healthy Life, which is a network of Black churches that have been funded to have full-time health care navigators, Black church health care navigators in the church, employed by the church, that make a connection between not just members of the church, but also members of the community and health-related services. So somebody coming in crisis, or a mother coming in crisis because they know the child is in crisis, and there's discussion about suicide, can absolutely get that number and call in and get the information that they need. And the health navigator can be with them in helping them receive the information that they need through 988. I think that I'm very happy that there's a resurgence of focus on this issue, and there is a solution coming out of the federal government for people who are in crisis that can pick up the phone and get something done immediately. It's going to be a great help to our Black church navigators for being trained on how to communicate, open conversation, and ensure that they have this resource 988 to give to the community when it's necessary.
I think I'm hearing from both of you and Deep. And Deep, that was a powerful analogy talking about a person seeing their home on fire, but when they step out, they realize the whole village is burning. And it's going to take this village, and similar to what Deborah was saying, to extinguish, so to speak, the fire that's burning. And the village are these healthcare navigators, which is a powerful model happening within houses of worship. So that way you're making everyone responsible for one another. And that's a very, very powerful model. Thank you so much for sharing, Deborah. Now we'll turn to Dr. Samira Ahmed, describing how you provide resources to faith as a means to help young people seek and benefit from support.
Hi, first of all, thank you for organizing this event. It's truly an honor to be with everyone today. When we think about the Muslim community, Islam as a faith recognizes that the struggle is there. Young people and their parents and families need a holding space for individuals in pain. And it also encourages them to obtain social support and seek professional treatment. And so these are kind of fundamentals and foundation. And Islam provides a framework for hope and acknowledgement of that pain that someone may be struggling with a promise for eventual ease and reward for carrying these challenges. And so these concepts are really empowering for someone in the depths of darkness who may be feeling depressed and expressing suicidal thoughts, and it may be kind of what they're hanging on to. Now, we take these concepts that are within our faith, and as Imam Talib mentioned, there is a lot of work that we need to do on suicide within Muslim communities. And so there's currently a movement of Muslim mental health professionals, organizations, and advocates to connect people to the resources that are culturally and religiously tailored. So at the Family Youth Institute, we have taken a public health approach to raise suicide awareness within the community by providing free and accessible mental health education. And so we do this by partnering with individuals within our communities to create caring communities. And when we do this, we're working with imams, we're working with teachers, parents, healthcare professionals, mentors, and we empower them with resources to reduce stigma and raise awareness, increase mental health literacy, and help them know who to connect people to and where they can get life-saving resources. And so this may be, connecting with a helpline, it may be connecting with a therapist, a psychiatrist, somebody within their community who can help them with the professional help. And so one of the things that we do is, as Deborah mentioned, there is distrust within communities of color, right? And one of the important things to do is create communities of care is to empower our religious leaders to address suicide with their congregations in a sensitive manner. Now, many Muslims gather for weekly Friday sermons, and this is a great way for a trusted, caring individual who's respected within the community to raise congregational suicide awareness and connect people with professionals who can really make a difference. So what we do is we empower religious leaders with a sermon template that they can copy and deliver to the congregation. And when you have this tool, you can start having conversations by empowering imams and other religious leaders who are then able to affect change within Muslim congregations. But beyond the religious leaders, how do you promote these congregational safety awareness? And so another thing that we've done is create infographics or posters that you can place in public places. And these posters have suicide warning signs and intervention information of where you can get help. This simple act of putting that poster up lets the individual know that this institution recognizes their pain and their struggle. And this is an important affirmation of one's experience because people feel seen and heard and that they actually matter. And so when an individual is seeing this and you're hearing the leadership talk about what they're struggling with and making it relevant, that increases the chance and the likelihood that an individual will reach out to get the help they need, as well as their friends and family noticing. So what we're doing is slowly developing caring communities. And that's a huge step to provide an individual relief in their pain.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. And as you can hear the intentionality of your focus areas and raising awareness and educating. And perhaps those that are listening today can think about ways to doing the same, posting, having posters actually in your house of worship if that's appropriate, and brochures and things of that nature to let them know that you're there to provide support. Thank you. And lastly, we'll hear from Dr. Mehta.
So I completely agree. There is no time now to be ostrich and put our heads in sand anymore. We need to acknowledge what's happening. And let me share with all of you that Hinduism which is Sanatan Dharma, is actually a way of life. It's rather than any particular belief system. It allows individual to follow their own belief system as long as certain life rules are followed. One of those basic tenets is non-violence in Hinduism, ahimsa, non-violence. So no violence towards any human being or animals at a body level, physical level, or at emotional level. And that is also, we know that suicide is violence or anger turns inwards. So that is also not actually acceptable. So Hinduism itself accepts the human being as a whole, that yes, we have sorrows and happiness and ups and downs in our life, but at the same token, one should not be violent towards themselves either. So violent turn inwards is suicide, and that is not the tenet of Hinduism. So a practicing Hindu, which is doing everyday morning prayer routine and going to house of worship every week or more than once a week, is constantly remembering that or getting that messages that non-violence towards others and non-violence towards oneself is very important part of day-to-day life. That does not mean that Hinduism is not acknowledging that there are moments where we feel weak, like the basic scriptures like Gita has actually, I'm sure everyone is aware of Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the deepest philosophical scriptures. It started with Arjun having panic attack. He was not able to think right. His mouth was getting dried. He was shaky. He was not able to do what he was supposed to be doing. And Bhagavan Krishna steps in and counsels him. And that's what Bhagavad Gita is. So it is acknowledged that yes, you would have the weak moment, you would have negative thoughts, but what you need to do during those times is to turn to people who are there for you, your family, your community, the social system, house of worship, your guru. And there are some practices that are interwoven, like now we all here are also doing that all the time, right? These are the basic practices that a Hindu does on a daily basis. Yoga, meditation, mindfulness practice, mantra, chanting, something positive over and over. So these are inbuilt practices that a Hindu should be doing. Now, do all of them do it on a regular basis? Probably not. And that's where the religious leaders needs to work more diligently in getting the youth especially and the adults and let's not forget our geriatric population, because rate of suicide is also very high in our geriatric, because they feel that there is no one, they don't have any more purpose on this world. So we need to take care of our elderly as well and strengthen that family unit. And when we put all of this together, that's where we are going to be able to find the solution to this problem. The family unit, the extended family unit, the social community, the religious community, and the nation together. So Deep, in your words, the whole village will have to come together to find the solution for this and try to major impact that BAPS or the Hindu community has been able to make, which is a health fair. There are mandirs, which are place of worship in almost all city in our nation, and health fairs are regularly happening. And part of the health fair now, and I'm very glad to see that, is that consultant from medical community, in psych community, therapists, psychiatrists are present there doing the mental health screening. And I have seen a very long line waiting to talk to a psychiatrist. And I'm pleasantly surprised that people are actually reaching out to psychiatrists and therapists and asking question. Hey, my kid is suffering and struggling in school. What do I do for it? Hey, my mother-in-law is very angry and rude, and what do I do about it? Well, yes, there are ways of dealing with this human relationships and these school struggles, peer pressure, and these social issues. We can all come together and do a lot of good to the community.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta. We're going to go on to our next questions, but we're hearing here, it takes a village. It takes a village, the family unit, the extended family unit, our religious community. Perhaps we can think of ways to incorporate the mental health care into our religious community more, encourage professional treatment, mental health exercises, as Dr. Mehta explained, perhaps adopting health navigators within your own house of worship, but raising awareness is key. Educate, educate, educate. You also heard empowering religious leaders with the sermon template. That can go a long way. Now we're going to go on to our close to our final question. I know an hour goes by pretty quickly, but let's take a look at, as a professional, what are you doing to address suicide prevention and mental health in your faith traditions and in your community? We're going to start with Dr. Ahmed, share about your work to address suicide in Muslim youth.
Yeah, I mean, as a psychologist and a researcher, as well as an educator, what we see and know is that there are disparities in mental health awareness, literacy, access. And one of the things that kind of is a barrier to all of that is having religiously and culturally tailored resources. So at the Family Youth Institute, we're taking kind of a multi-pronged approach to ignite changes within the Muslim American communities. And so one of those is really paying attention to representation and development of culturally and religiously tailored suicide awareness resources. We don't really realize how much representation matters, because what happens is a Muslim American may see resources and they can't connect to it. They don't see themselves in it. And so when we start seeing resources that are kind of reflective of one's experiences, integrating spiritual coping resources versus in conceptualizations, it touches an individual who may be struggling in a very deep way that's personally meaningful. And so what we're trying to do is create those resources that are available, that represent and integrate these realities, faces, individuals versus coping tools, so that Muslims can realize that these resources are for them because it's an issue that they are struggling with, which then again is affirmation of somebody who is struggling with this experience, right? So that's one thing that we're doing. A second thing, we talked about empowering and creating communities. Well, one of the things, the more people on the ground in the communities, in the relationships with people who may be struggling, the better. And so we have been doing for a number of years suicide prevention training and helping people realize, what are the warning signs? Who do you go to in your community to get help? And then how do you get help? And recognizing that one of the most important factors is that relationship. And you don't have to be a clinician to have a powerful relationship that can help an individual keep going. The fact that you care can make the difference, right?
Mhm.
And so what we're trying to do is doing those prevention training and providing leaders and community members a guidebook, a roadmap of how they can do programming within their communities. Again, it's freely available, integrates Muslim values and beliefs as well as clinical knowledge, and recognizes the typical kind of things that may be happening in programs within the mosque or outside the mosque, right? And so giving them those tools so that they're digitally available at any time of the day, whether you need it for prevention, postvention, whatever, so that people have access to. So really thinking about one, communities and what can you do for them at that place, but also we recognize that Muslims are not all, there are some Muslims who are isolated and are not part of or connected to communities, and we care about them as well. And these individuals also need access to care and experience barriers to treatment. And so generally, we overcome in the community these barriers to help people through the caring relationship. But when you're not connected to community and you're isolated, we really need to meet people where they're at. And oftentimes they're online, right? The latest research shows us that most individuals are getting their healthcare information and knowledge online. And so we've developed a treasure trove of digital resources. And again, the idea is to overcome obstacles to care. One of the things that we have is the suicide prevention toolkit. And in there are the typical questions that people may have when they're struggling. One of the things, and sometimes, for example, if an individual is really having suicidal thoughts and is thinking about, should I go to inpatient, get hospitalized? Well, one of the factors that may be of concern to people is, well, what's hospitalization look like? What can I expect? And the fact that you don't have that knowledge can really be an obstacle for an individual. And so what we're trying to do is give them education, to give them knowledge so that they can make an informed decision, have control at a time and place where they don't maybe feel empowered to have access to that information can really make a difference. And so really having those types of resources, helping individuals, like for example, if you have a friend or if you're a parent and, somebody they care for is having suicidal thoughts at 2 in the morning, where are you going to go? Again, having that digitally available 24/7, online, free, that really decreases the barriers and access to information. And when you're depressed, the availability and access to knowledge, helplines, resources, and direction can be your lifeline. And so we're really excited to be providing that for the community.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Josephine Kim, share about Mustard Seed Generation Training Korean faith leaders engage about mental well-being.
Yes, well, education in our community is an important value. And so we really use that as a vehicle to raise mental health awareness, to also caretake and to connect people to resources. We found making this education accessible in terms of language and culture is just crucial. And representation is so important. So it's really important to watch someone who looks like you present these materials, to talk about it in a really intelligible way, I think has been really important because it gives them permission to also talk and also seek help. We're also, what's beautiful about education in our community is that education also spreads by word of mouth. And so in the research about most Asian American communities is that for the one person we educate, 4 other people become informed. And so that's really exciting and what makes us really focus on education. So some of the specific programs that we've launched are mental health first aid training for Asian Americans. Again, really focused on culture, making that education accessible. We provide bilingual webinars on bridging the cultural gap between immigrant parents and their Americanized children, how to actually communicate about mental health issues between parents and children. We also raise the visibility of Korean American mental health professionals through a directory so that people can find them, right? We know they exist and it's important to highlight them. So these are counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, And we also are very intentional about lifting their language capabilities because we know that serves as a barrier sometimes. We also know that helpers actually need help too, right? So we created a national summit for mental health professionals of Korean descent, where they come together to kind of refill, to re-energize, and to discuss salient issues that they're dealing with on the ground. And that's been really important for us. I would say what's been a real highlight for us lately is one of the most exciting initiatives is a culturally relevant and linguistically inclusive mental health training for faith leaders, church leaders that really destigmatizes mental health. It increases their mental health literacy and their ability to really recognize signs and symptoms. And the training and the curriculum that we've created is done bilingually. It's culturally specific to Korean American churches, really approaching church leaders as the first responders, equipping them with the language and the tools they need so that they can recognize, right, when crisis might be happening in their churches. We partner with professionals who are of Korean descent, and we provide this training, again, people who straddle both the faith world as well as the mental health profession. And that's been really powerful for us to really be involved with. All of the links that to the initiatives and the programs that I've just shared are being shared in the chat. And so I would love for people to have access to those.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kim. I'm also encouraging our panelists, if you want to just drop your information in the chat and people can reach out to you directly. That was definitely welcomed at this time. We're going to go on to Erin Barr.
Thank you. So at Upstreet, again, we serve individuals between the ages of 12 and 22. Young people, particularly in that age range, are digital natives. So we're providing services to them in, their native language. Most of our services are provided online through our website. We meet them where they are, and rather than expecting them to fit into our existing model of service delivery, we adapted our model to be able to get them. I think putting things online and making it accessible to young people also gives them agency over their own mental wellness and their own well-being. They're able to do this sort of on their own, and that in itself, the idea of achieving mastery is also lends itself to better mental health outcomes. So in addition to offering individual therapy, which we do both a little bit in person now and virtually, we also have brief support services that we offer through a chatbot on our website. So that means they can just come by and talk to one of our therapists about literally anything that's on their mind. And again, it reduces barriers because these are young people. They don't need to get a ride. They don't need to make an appointment. They don't need to be an existing client. They don't have to pay for anything. They don't even really need to think that far ahead in the future. They can just show up. I think what we also do with the brief support services are not everything. You don't have to be suicidal or in a state of true crisis in order to talk to one of our therapists. I think sometimes there's crisis lines, there's inpatient hospitalization, and there's outpatient therapy, and there's not much else in the middle. So at Upstreet, we're trying to fill in some of those gaps by providing support for those everyday moments. Young people, I think, experience what they feel are crises, right? They were betrayed by their best friend. They have great anxiety about the upcoming SATs or what they're going to do after they graduate. And so having somewhere to go to talk about those things, I think, is really important to help mitigate some of the bigger problems that can come out if you don't have any outlet for those, right? I think if you called a crisis line and said, my best friend was telling all of my deepest, darkest secrets, they might be like, okay. So we're going to refer you to a local therapist, right? That's not what they're trained to do. That's sort of jamming up their lines for true emergencies. But for young people, that is a true emergency. And so Upstreet's able to sort of meet them in the middle. And it also helps fill in the gaps while waiting for services. I don't know what's going on in your parts of the world, but I'm guessing it's similar to Pittsburgh. There's long wait lists to get in to see therapists, right? So it's not like you can just call a therapist and start therapy next week. It can often take months before that starts. So these brief support services that we offer online that a young person can access from their phone or from their laptop sort of helps to bridge some of that until they're able to get into therapy and work on some of the other issues. The other thing we're doing is we're in the process of opening a brick and mortar location. So we will have a physical space, and we are going to co-locate with our the youth career services part of Jewish Family and Community Services. So we're going to have youth career services and youth mental health in the same place, which I think putting mental health services in a place with services that carry less stigma might make it more accessible to people, so they can come in and work on their resumes or work on college essays, financial aid applications, wait to get on the bus to go to a college tour. But like the mental health services are there too. So we're really trying to address the whole person and just bring mental health and mental wellness into like the everyday conversations, the everyday services that we're providing, which hopefully does ultimately reduce the stigma and just kind of make it all the same thing, right? Because we know as adults, hopefully, that our mental health affects our performance at work, or our ability to show up for work, or engage in that meeting, or speak on that panel. And so teaching that message to young people as they're preparing to enter the workforce, I think hopefully will have good outcomes in the future.
Thank you. I think an important point you made, Erin, was including bringing a mental health conversation in everything that you're doing with the youth to create the environment they need to thrive and not just survive. You also heard about having religiously and culturally tailored resources. We don't realize how much representation matter. You've heard suicide prevention trainings being offered, encouraging digital toolkits, because that's where a lot of our people live. Education being an important value, and bilingual webinars are being offered as well through Dr. Kim. Again, I encourage those that are part of the webinar today to reach out to these individuals. You don't have to recreate some of these wheels. They've been created for you. And then lastly, we heard about training churches and houses of worship to be first responders. And it has been proven that those that attend houses of worship, the first door they knock at are their house of worship. And so let's be sensitive to that, knowing that if they're coming to us first, what are we doing when they come? Last question, all cameras on, and this is going to be a rapid fire piece, 1 minute each. As a faith leader or a person of faith, what does your tradition say to people who are hurting and struggling through a crisis? What is your community's 1 minute word of hope? Let us start with, I am going to call on Deep Singh, who's part of the Sikh community.
I think one of a word that I really get from the Sikh tradition is we are beings of love. We are all connected to each other. We all emanate from the divine. We all profuse the divine, and really to tap into it together. Anything we do together, we do better. And you know, I have nothing but sort of compassion, empathy, and sympathy for those that might be hurting right now.
Thank you, Dr. Mehta.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world, it's a Sanskrit, the whole world is one family. So we are here for each other. Suicide is unnatural death. It's a permanent unhealthy solution to a temporary stress response, stress situation. So please remember, you are not alone. We are all here for you. Please remember that our Guru, our God, Bhagwan, is always with us, and stay focused, stay connected, reach out, help is available. If not, anywhere else, 988.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
So one of my favorite verses from the Quran is, "Verily with hardship comes ease, in the al-usri yusra." And for those of you who may be in pain, recognize you may be at your lowest point, and Islam acknowledges the pain and the hardship, and helps you realize that God sees and hears your pain and suffering, and will provide you a way out as you take your first step towards change. And so change may look like acknowledging the blessings that he's given you, as well as seeking medical and psychological support and interventions. It means obtaining community support and spiritual healing and direction. And these are all blessings that we have at our disposal. And if we can take one step at a time, as you work through this hardship, you have been promised ease after this difficulty. And so remember, rarely with hardship comes ease.
Thank you. Erin?
So I think I would echo at least one of the things that Dr. Mehta just said, in that you are not alone. So if you are struggling, there's people around you. You know, I'm not a rabbi, but I was raised in the Jewish tradition, and there's this notion of community, right? Like, we mourn in community, we pray, we need a certain number of people to even begin saying certain prayers because we can't do things alone. And so the sense of community is very strong within the Jewish tradition. And if you are struggling, someone is there to support you. Someone else is likely struggling or has already struggled and come through whatever it was that they were struggling with, and would be, you know, available to you to support. So that the sense of community, the sense of having someone somewhere within that community to reach out to, I think is an important message.
Deborah?
It is the title of our program. Deuteronomy says that when God
Freezing up a little bit.
so that thou and thy seed may live.
Can you repeat that, Deborah, because you froze up? Can you repeat that? You froze
Choose
up.
life. Okay. I think my internet is a little unstable. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The title of our program is Choose Life. It comes from Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy says, choose life so that thou and thy seed shall live. It is a message of both empowerment, that we have the ability to choose life over death, and it is a message of future hope, so that thou and thy seed may live. Something else is coming. Be here for it. Choose life. And I want to repeat what the other panelist said, Dow 988, get that in. And let's ingrain that in all of our houses of worship, so everybody will have the ability and a tool to choose life, so that them and their children shall live.
Thank you, Deborah. Dr. Kim?
Yes, I would say if you're hurting, of course we're hurting. It's not because you're weak or something is wrong with you, but it's really often a natural reaction to the traumas and the tragedies that surround us on this side of heaven. And what we see, about God in the Bible all throughout is that God is an emotional being who also cares about our emotions, and that there isn't a single experience that's outside of the human experience. And my faith invites all who are weary to come just as you are, that there's unconditional love and acceptance, and our duty in the community is to share each other's burdens, and so you don't have to suffer in isolation and silence.
Thank you. Imam Sharif?
Yes, I want to say that Dr. Samira, she stole some of my thunder there on that verse. But yeah, this has been great. And in fact, she has a model that we definitely need to get that across the nation too, in our other communities. But I want to, there's another verse that says, Estainu bisabri wa salati, inna Allah ma'al sabirin. And that's God really, it recognizes that none of us are born in a vacuum. All of us are physically connected to someone, and our needs, the needs of life in a state of nature are facilitated. So God is saying that he said, seek help, and he tells us how to seek help, be patient in seeking help, and pray, and said, don't give up. This is what this verse is saying. Don't give up. And that means reach out. And we have been hearing several means of, if you don't have anyone physical, we have internet, we have telephones, we have the 98 number. There are different ways to reach out. And it's not just the person to reach out, it's also those who have been trained in seeing the signs in those who are being disturbed to reach out as well. It should go both ways. We're invisible and we're visible. So that's to tell us we need the help of both, spiritual and also through people. God helps us through people, and he will always make sure that there's someone here that will be there with concern and care for you, just as when you came from your mother and you reached and you had faith that the help you needed would be there. It remains.
Thank you, Imam. Rabbi Potasnik.
Thank you so much for this extraordinary program. We say those who close their eyes never see tears. And I think what we've demonstrated today is we won't close our eyes, and we certainly won't close our mouths for all of those who suffer, sometimes in silence. One of the books I read about suicide was written by Dr. Jennifer Ashton. She's the chief medical correspondent for ABC TV. Her husband died through suicide. So it shows you that it can happen not only to all denominations, but people wherever they are in the socioeconomic field. I heard the word co-located today. Maybe we ought to think more carefully about maybe co-locating mental health professionals and houses of worship. We need to be more connected to one another. My father, a survivor of the Holocaust, was asked by me, "How did you survive?" He said, "Joe, I learned you can go 3 days without water, you can go 3 days without food, but you can't go 3 days without hope." I hope to convey to everyone that we will not allow them to go on without hope. A firefighter who saved someone in 9/11 said to me, "You reached this woman." I said, "Well, what did she say when you reached her?" She said, "I knew you would come." And I hope that is what people will feel, that we'll be there to give them strength and support. We won't close our eyes. We're not going to close our hands or our mouths. Thank you so much for this honor.
Thank you, all of our esteemed panelists. As long as there's breath, there is hope. You've heard we're all beings of love. We're all connected to one another. And let us intentionally be that world vision. Let us intentionally be that world village. Because if it's burning, then we have to come up with the solutions together. And that is what we did here today, and we will continue to do. Remember, it takes a village. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take advantage of the resources that are in the chat. As you heard today, seek help. It's not a sign of weakness. God is an emotional being who also cares about our emotions. God bless.
God bless you, Reverend English.
Thank you.
Thank you.